Thanks. I'm honored to be with you tonight to present the Colonel Peter Ortiz Award to one of our outstanding Special Operations warriors, U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer for Shane Gandy. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank Charles and the USS Society for all they do to celebrate the history of this nation's Special Operations and intelligence communities, who both trace their lineage to General Donovan and whose portrait hangs in the headquarters of both the CIA and headquarters USSOCOM in Tampa. I'd also like to thank the OSS members and their families in attendance tonight to recognize their sacrifices and laud the standard they set for the generations that follow. Your feats are truly the things of legend. Colonel Peter Ortiz and the OSS continue to inspire the U.S. Special Operations community. I'm proud to be a member of this community and have spent the last 24 years of my career working with some of the most dedicated and talented warriors this nation has to offer. And to paraphrase General Donovan, as shown on the banner as we walked in here tonight, these really are individuals with a PhD level intellect who could win in a bar fight. I continue to be inspired by their level of expertise, by their personal drive, by their bravery, and the many acts of selfless service that are just business as usual. These are the traits Colonel Ortiz demonstrated throughout his career and what this award tonight embodies. Anyone conducting a cursory overview of Colonel Peter Ortiz's accomplishments quickly realizes this was a man who did not shy away from being in the thick of things and someone who possessed extreme grit and determination. The most decorated member of the OSS, one of its most storied operators, Ortiz's exploits are the thing of no-kidding action movies, and Hollywood in fact made 2 action movies based on his exploits. His brazen acts against the enemy show one aspect of his courage, like the time he forced a group of German officers in Nazi-occupied France at gunpoint to drink toast to both President Roosevelt and the U.S. Marine Corps. But I'm equally drawn to another side, a gritty man who selflessly and continually raised his hand for difficult service in the French Foreign Legion and the U.S. Marine Corps, and finally for assignment in the OSS. He inspired his troops, he inspired the resistance forces he worked with, and his efforts produced outsized results across North Africa and Europe. His commitment also resulted in personal adversity for Colonel Ortiz. He received multiple combat-related injuries and earned 2 trips to German prisoner of war camps for his efforts, but he always battled back from these setbacks and continued to raise his hand to be sent back into the fight. This brings me to tonight's recipient, Chief Warrant Officer for Shane Gandy. Shane is no stranger to personal adversity, and like Colonel Ortiz, has risen above it to serve as an inspiration for the men and women he's served with in his 23-year Army career. He's the epitome of the Special Forces motto, silent professionals. As a longtime member of the 1st Special Forces Group, Shane deployed to 8 different countries across Asia as a member of a small, soft footprint, quietly helping build partner capacity to counter terrorist threats. In 2010, the deadliest year in Afghanistan for our 16-year commitment there, Shane deployed to the Taliban heartland in the southern part of the country. During his rotation, Shane experienced an IED strike that resulted in the partial amputation of his right hand and his foot. He endured years of rehab and over 30 surgeries, all with the goal of returning to the fight. During his recovery, not only was he worried about himself, he also served as a patient advocate, helping his fellow soldiers as they recovered from their wounds. He also contributed feedback to his chain of command so they knew the best kind of care it would take to get the soldiers back in the fight. In a short time, Shane was combat ready and again raised his hand for service in Afghanistan. He was handpicked to serve as the officer in charge of the Joint Effects Cell for Special Operations Task Force West, which covered over 40% of the country of Afghanistan. This cell synchronizes the kinetic and non-kinetic actions to ensure we get the best results of our overall military operations. This work is some of the hardest to facilitate and arguably the most important to the long-term stability of the country and our effort there. Shane's battalion commander from this deployment emphatically stated, "Shane is the best targeting officer I've ever worked with. His efforts brought more of our guys home, provided stability to more parts of Afghanistan, and assured more enemy were taken off the battlefield." His commander also shared with me an anecdote from that rotation that demonstrates Shane's mettle. During the deployment, Their helicopter flew directly overhead the site where Shane was wounded in 2010. Shane casually pointed out the spot to his commander, and as an afterthought, he quietly muttered, "F them," and he smiled. His comment was not about anger or revenge, but an acknowledgement they took a pretty good shot at him. But he got back up and was going to work tirelessly to make sure his side was successful. As he and I were chatting earlier tonight, he goes, "I like to win." His commander told me during the helicopter ride back to their base, he was sitting there in awe of Shane, saying, "Where do we find men such as these?" Shane continues to have outsized effects on our force. Most recently, he facilitated his company's participation in a cutting-edge unconventional warfare exercise, as well as enabling over 40 deployments across Asia to train host nation partner forces. This is clearly a man who, like Colonel Ortiz, likes to be in the thick of things and continues to work tirelessly in defense of our great nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me recognize this year's Peter Ortiz Award recipient, Chief Warrant Officer 4, Shane Gandy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending tonight's event. Like Lieutenant Colonel Peter Ortiz, there are so many here tonight who have given so much to keep this experiment of self-government, of the people, for the people, alive. During my career, it is the legends of the OSS that I've always wanted to emulate. Not a day has gone by that when I don my Green Beret, I somehow feel unworthy of the legacy entrusted to me from these giants who came before me. The methodologies pioneered by the OSS of rallying a sympathetic population, through them taking the fight to the enemy well behind enemy lines, which in turn decreased the enemy's effectiveness and ultimately saved American lives. This population-centric strategy is the hallmark of modern-day Army Special Forces. My experience has taught me that the old adage is true, that we do not rise to the occasion, but we fall to the level of our training. And our training and the standards that we uphold today are based on the lessons learned by the brave men and women of the OSS, oftentimes paid for in blood. Now, some ask me, what is it that Special Operations Forces do that is so different than the rest of the military? And I can discuss a tiered system or doctrine or the various missions such as unconventional warfare or special reconnaissance. But the one thing that we must do well is ambiguous problem solving. Thrust into a murky situations without clear right or wrong answers, just the light of a commander's intent and a loftily worded instate to guide us, and we must prevail. When things get weird, and trust me, things get weird, there's rarely a well-lit path without peril. It is our Special Operations Forces that influence this rapidly changing world directly, but most often indirectly, meeting our national strategic goals, and if done right, absent any indicators that we were ever involved at all. And I'm also asked why the men and women of Special Operations do this job. Why do they make the sacrifices they do? And why do they take the risk? And I can tell you about an absolute love of country and a dedication to our way of life. I can tell you about protecting our families, our children from the harshness and evils of this world. And I can mention the camaraderie and absolute trust that exists within these ranks that's rarely found anywhere else, and that we just simply do it for each other. But reflecting on the men and women out there doing this job right now, and looking at all the sacrifices made by those in this profession, and when I think about those who have given all in defense of this nation, I can sum up all those previous sentiments in a single sentence. For the men and women cut from this cloth, doing nothing is not an option. For the risk of allowing evil to prevail is just too great. In an uncertain world, there's one thing I can assure you of, that men and women adept to this life as a shadow warrior will continue to wade into that uncertainty on our behalf in an effort to provide clarity to that executive, that policymaker, that diplomat, or that general. As a quiet professional, never seeking the spotlight, I find myself somewhat out of place and certainly out of sorts at such an august dinner, accepting such a prestigious award. So it is on behalf of my hidden brothers and sisters in arms that I thank you for bestowing upon me this great honor of the Lieutenant Colonel Peter J. Ortiz Award. Thank you. Dio presso libero.